subuh. A very good morning to everyone present today. It is my privilege and honor to welcome you to this 3-day online research methodology workshop organized by the Discipline of Sociology at Krishnakanta Hondiko State Open University in collaboration with the Indian Sociological Society. Over the next few days, we will delve into various aspects of qualitative research, a field that continues to broaden and deepen our understanding of the complexities within the social sciences. We are delighted to have distinguished speakers join us, as well as participants from a range of universities. And this diversity will, I'm sure, enrich our knowledge sharing experience, making this workshop a collaborative and insightful journey. Hello, am I audible?
Yes, you are audible.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, you are audible.
Okay, thank you, sir. To officially commence our event, we are honored to have with us Professor Maitri Chaudhary, who will deliver the inaugural address. Professor Chaudhary taught at the Center for the Study of Social Systems at Jawaharlal Nehru University from 1990 to 2021 and is currently serving as the president of the Indian Sociological Society. She has written extensively on topics such as feminism, media, academia, and pedagogy. Her main works include The Women's Movement in India, Reform and Revival, The Practice of Sociology, Feminism in India, and Sociology in India, Intellectual and Institutional Trends. Her most recent publications include Refashioning India, Gender, Media, and Public Discourse, and a co-edited volume titled Doing Theory, Locations, Hierarchies, and Disjunctions. She is also one of the co-founders of Doing Sociology, an online blog that fosters discussions on sociology and social anthropology from the Global South. And additionally, she actively shares her knowledge on YouTube, making academic insights more accessible to the broader public. Ma'am, we are truly privileged to have you with us today and are deeply grateful for your continuous guidance and support.
Thank you.
I now request you to kindly address the audience, ma'am.
Thank you very much. So it is an honor and privilege to be invited to the Qualitative Research Methodology organized by Surya Kumar Bhuya School of Social Science, Krishnakanta Handike State Open University located in Guwahati. I am really grateful to the respected Vice Chancellor, Professor Rajendra Prasad Das, without whose initiative this probably wouldn't happen, to my fellow teachers, Maureen, Gargi, and of course, dear students across the country. And I don't know, I hear that there are also members who are joining in from abroad. This is a very special opportunity to connect with people. In fact, I see not only the Indian Sociological Society, but I see all universities, particularly a university which is an open university doing with reaching out to people in remote areas, to people who are disadvantaged and are unable to go to the main universities, which are offline physical universities. So the initiative by Open University, and in some sense, coincide with our objective and goal in the Indian Sociological Society. I speak here today as a teacher, because it is as a teacher that our basic commitment lies to education, to reach out to people, researchers, young students, scholars, fellow teachers, academics, academic administrators, to share the kind of experiences that we've had as teachers. I, of course, belong to an older generation. My experience as a student and as a teacher are in the first decades after 1947, when India became independent, where the entire investment was on public education, was to realize the goal of both equity, justice, as well as development. The world has dramatically changed. As Maureen has mentioned, I had retired in 2021. And the world, as I function as the president of the Indian Sociological Society, is dramatically different. There is a whole group of private universities which have flooded the country in a fashion which many of my generation could only barely imagine. The private universities, many of them are very good, many of them are not so good. But what distinguishes them from the public university is usually access to the larger section of young students across the country who may not have wherewithal or the monetary ability to pay the high fees which are demanded. When we talk about public education and we talk about public university, it is not so much whether it is owned by the government or not owned by the government, which is the matter. The issue is that the education that we are doing, is it reaching out to a public which is larger than any kind of specific social dominant groups in society? Is it creating a condition where we can interact, talk to each other, share our ideas, and share our confusions? Because confusions are also extremely important in education. This idea of creating a public discourse, public world, where we can communicate with each other, discuss issues which are important to our society, issues which impinge on us. Now, different kinds of disciplines engage with social issues differently. Scientists can produce and invent new technologies, like the kind of technology which we are using today in online education, is dramatic. Social sciences, sociology cannot create these kind of dramatic inventions. But what we can do is create an idea and a culture of an awareness about our past, our present, and our future. Our awareness about the manner in which the country gained independence from British colonialism and trying to build a more just, democratic society built into our constitutional vision. What we can do is to relate the fact that modern social science and modern sociology is very different, fundamentally different from traditional forms of knowledge. Just like alchemy is different from chemistry, like that, philosophical accounts, reflective knowledge about society is fundamentally different from sociology and social sciences, which depend on a certain sense, not in an absolute sense, on a certain sense on modern codes of scientific investigation, which means what we may know today is context specific. It can be challenged, it can be questioned, and it can be modified. So social sciences has to be modest. It has to be incremental and has to be committed not just to concerns of society, but to understand how do we gain knowledge. It's in this context that this particular workshop on qualitative research methodology is so important. Because if we do not hone our skills of method, how do we gain knowledge which is valid, which can be replicated, and which can be corrected? Methodology is our entry point to understand the nature of society. That is the nature of human beings, the nature of human lives, which is what we call ontology, and the nature of theory of knowledge, which is epistemology. This is important. Now, I want to very quickly, I've told you a new context of new private universities, increasing difference between the kind of education being provided by one university as compared to another. For example, earlier we used to discuss school education and talk about government schools, where everybody used to go to at one point of time. My parents all went to government schools. Their point schools are gone, used by middle classes, and the government schools are left to the more dispossessed. We didn't have it in our university system. Our universities, whether it was University of Delhi or Guwahati University or Bombay University, were universities where everybody went. This change is more near, more recent, and globally a dominant pattern, what we call a neoliberal model, where universities are increasingly seen as a site of revenue generation. As social scientists, we see the possibilities of it and the limits of it. Now, in this context, how do I, as the president of the Indian Sociological Society, see the role of professional associations like the Indian Sociological Society? The Indian Sociological Society, to share with you small points, was established in 1951 in Bombay, and it had just 107 members. Today, we have crossed 6,500 members across the country, every region, every part. I would reach out to you at this point to ask people to join. When I took over, I was very keen to do collaborative work because it is only with collaboration that we can hone and develop the idea of a public discourse informed of sociology. The key initiative to set up the Indian Sociological Society was taken by Professor G.S. Ghure, then professor and head of Department of Sociology at the University of Bombay. And around the same time, we also had an initiative to establish the All India Sociological Conference by Professor R.K. Mukherjee and D.P. Mukherjee in Lucknow. At some point in the mid-60s, the two decided to merge, and we have the Indian Sociological Society and the All India Sociological Conference merged together in October 1967. We published 3 journals, the Sociological Bulletin, the Hindi Samiksha, a newsletter, and an e-exploration journal. I would reach out to you if you have young scholars, young teachers who would like to start another kind of initiative, maybe a book review, maybe a small journal in a particular language which would be circulated within the region. Whatever it be, I would like to say a professional organization is an inclusive organization. It wishes to reach out to people, as many people as possible. Now, this vision is extremely important to explain why we are having the collaborative workshop that we are having here today. I reach out to all of you if you would want to do any kind of writing workshop, reading workshop, any methodology workshop of this kind, maybe a kind of lecture. Please write to us. Please become life members. You would have also noticed, those of you who are more familiar with the Indian Sociological Society, if you go to the website, we have research committees, 33, 34 research committees. And if you become a member of the research committee, you can share the kind of research you are doing, or you can hear other peers discuss the research that you are doing. Here is the space where we also try to cultivate the idea of research, writing, and finally publication, which is much in demand in the contemporary world. I reach out to you once again, asking you to be a member of the Indian Sociological Society to help us expand, develop, and bring in quality education. Mass education without quality is no education. Inequality has to be addressed by quality education, not by diluting the nature of education. Thank you very much. Thank you for this opportunity once again to the Surya Kumar Bhuya School of Social Sciences, Krishna Kanta Handik State Open University. Thank you, Honorable Vice Chancellor, and the entire faculty of this university. Thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am, for the insightful deliberation and highlighting the changes and various developments as we can see in the various universities and in the education system. Now, may I now request Professor Nipendra Narayan Sharma, former Vice Chancellor and Director of Moniram Devan School of Management, Krishnakanta Hondiko State Open University, to share a few words with us. Sir.
Thank you. Honorable Vice Chancellor, Professor R.P. Das, distinguished Professor Madam Moitri Chaudhuri, my esteemed colleague Professor Joydeep Burma, and dear participants in this 3-day online workshop on qualitative research methodology. When I first came to know about this workshop, I felt very happy because this is the call of the day. Call of the day not from the point of view of qualitative research on its own, but from the point of view of the mixed methods of research. We all know mostly about the triangulation. And the concept of triangulation imparts that we need to think in holistic terms. When we talk about quantitative research, we go about the measurement, we go about the exactment, precision, and all those things. Measurability becomes the key concern. But many times we are confronted that measurability is not the key question, measurability is not the key solution. So in order to address it from the holistic perspective, we need to make resort to qualitative research. And while doing qualitative research, many of us encounter the methodological constraints. Even today, in qualitative research also, we have come across many kinds of measurable platforms, use of softwares and all those things. But whatsoever, it ultimately addresses the holistic perspectives. Some of the things which quantitative research cannot answer, qualitative research comes in terms of the mixed method of research. That's why we go for supplementation, we go for cross-verification. So this 3 days online workshop will give all the participants a lot of opportunities to see their research from some kind of other perspectives. Those of you who are doing your quantitative research, adopted quantitative research tools, can think about supplementing your findings from quantitative research tools, and in terms of a justification or maybe rationalization by adopting the tools of qualitative research. And to that extent, you need to equip yourselves. And those of you who have been extensively or maybe wholly relying on qualitative research methodologies, this will give you ample opportunities to fine-tune your methods, to streamline your procedural perspectives, and to improve the quality of your research. So I hope, and I'm quite hopeful, that this 3 days online workshop on qualitative research methodology will give you lots of insights to carry out your research in a very convincing manner, in a very satisfying manner, so that you can address holistic perspectives. More often, when we talk about the case methodology of research, we say this holistic perspective, because this has been able not only in terms of proving some kind of hypothesis, but gives us an entire picture of the entire scenario. So I wish you all the learning from today's workshop. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for your insightful deliberation. May I now request the Honorable Vice Chancellor of Krishnakanta Hondiko State Open University, Professor Rajendra Prasad Das ji, to kindly share a few words with us. Sir, we are truly grateful for your support and guidance in making initiatives like this workshop possible. We look forward to your thoughts, sir.
Thank you, Maureen. Good morning, everybody. Respected Maitri Chaudhary ji, President, Indian Sociological Society, my colleague, Professor N.N. Sharma ji, Professor Jaideep Barua ji, and organizer Dr. Gargi, who has taken initiative under the leadership of their director, and all my dearest participants, not only from our country, but from other parts of the world. I am really not happy, I am delighted that in a very small time, with efforts, sincere efforts of the school, Surya Kumar Bhuya School of Social Science could organize this workshop in such a large scale, involving intellectuals, top ranking intellectuals of research methodology from across the country. I'm extremely grateful to Madam Maitri for giving her opening remark. It was really very insightful, thought-provoking, and has given enough message to all the participants that what we mean by organizing this 3 days research workshop on quality research methodology. In fact, Madam Maitri and me, almost we are contemporary. She retired in 21. I'll be retiring in after 1.5 years. But if we remember the journey we started as a researcher, I was a full-time research scholar and my guide was a psychologist, subsequently become a professor of management from Delhi University. But that time, there was no discussion about quality. I finished my PhD in 88. There was no discussion about quality because research means quality. As a student of management, sometimes we give example that we talk about Suddha ghee, we talk about Desi ghee. But in our time, research means quality. Why today we talk about quality research, quality publication, quality teaching? Because somewhere there has been some problem by some of us for which people are raising this question: do you have quality? Do you have quality in your publication? Do you have quality in your research? Do you have quality in your teaching? This is happening because somewhere there is dilution. And particularly after the availability of SPSS package, sometimes people lightly, humorously say that we compare donkey with horse and we say there is a relationship, we say there is no relationship, and we say it is significant, we say it is not significant. When we compare bird with elephant, and we say that there is a significant relationship because depending upon that. There are many issues which I think this is not a right platform to speak. But even I remember during my research time as a scholar from 84 to 89, both quantity and quality efforts were made, quality analysis were made whenever the data, depending upon the nature of the data. I had made, my guide had suggested, I had felt that we have quantitative technique we have used and qualitative technique also we have used for analysis of our data. Now, with the passage of time, the director of the school, who is very popular in not only in Northeast, across the country as a researcher, particularly in data analysis, in research methodology, his contribution, his involvement, his popularity, is involved in this research, and he's going to talk about the methodology to be used for analysis of qualitative data is definitely going to be very insightful for all the participants who are participating in this program. My dearest participants, I'm very happy that so many of you have joined this 3 days workshop, and the nature of people, research persons who are involved in this workshop, I believe that I should take leave and I should have participated in this workshop, but I am helpless. I request the director of this research that I should be given 2-3 slots in which, despite of my schedule, I will attend this workshop. I want to know that what new changes they are using in quality research to make it more useful, meaningful, so that the people who are doing quality research, adopting quality research methodology, they should not feel inferior because time has come. We should not only boast that we have data, our research papers, thesis has large number of quantitative data. Whenever there is qualitative data with us, how we have to analyze it, what method we have to use in those data so that it can have a meaningful analysis, meaningful interpretation, and a meaningful finding which can be usable. I believe that I should not waste your time that looking at the nature of resource persons involved looking at the people from across the country and abroad. I appreciate, I congratulate the school and the organizer of this 3 days workshop. I am sure the participants will be largely benefited. They will get an idea that how to conduct qualitative research by using appropriate methodology so that they can substantially contribute to the academic environment of the world. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. Wish you all the best. I am sure this workshop will definitely give solid idea to all the participants to improve their quality research by using quality research methodology so that they will be richly benefited from this workshop. Thank you. Wish you all the best.
Thank you so much, sir, for highlighting the significance of this workshop and addressing our shared commitment to advancing research in social sciences. I now invite Dr. Gargi Gayon to deliver the vote of thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Maureen. At the outset, I would like to thank Honorable Vice Chancellor, sir, for laying immense trust upon our vision. Thank you so much. I am extremely grateful to Indian Sociological Society for the encouraging response to our request for collaboration. Thank you so much. I take this opportunity to thank all our esteemed resource persons for consenting to share your valuable knowledge with us. I am grateful to Professor Joydeep Porua, Director, Pujya Kumar Bhuiya School of Social Sciences, for his unwavering support in planning and executing this workshop. I am grateful to Dr. Ridip Dev Chaudhary, Dr. Shruti Shubha Bharali from the Department of Computer Sciences, Dr. Binod Deka, IT Cell, for customizing the learning management system for the workshop. And finally, I am thankful to all the participants for choosing to be a part of this journey. Despite being physically apart, I hope we will develop a meaningful dialogue, and I hope in the process we grow together. Thank you so much. We will begin our first session by 10:30. Let's join.
Thank you, Dr. Gargi. We'll now take a short 5-minute break before we commence with the first session of the workshop at 10:30 Indian Standard Time. And we look forward to an engaging and productive workshop with you all. Thank you. Hello, everyone, once again. I extend a very warm welcome to the first session of our 3-day online workshop on qualitative research methodology. For this session, we have amongst us Professor Leena Pujari. She will be speaking on the topic Introduction to Qualitative Research and the Significance of Reflexivity. Professor Leena Pujari is a feminist sociologist, currently professor and head of the sociology department at KC College and dean of the Faculty of Interdisciplinary Studies at HSNC University, Mumbai. Her research focuses on gender studies, feminist pedagogy, resistance, and jurisprudence, with significant publications in Sociological Bulletin, EPW, and Explorations. She has been invited as a resource person by UNICEF, SOAS University London, IMPRI New Delhi, Population First, and other prominent institutions. As a member of the Board of Studies in Sociology at the University of Mumbai from 2012 to 2022, she has contributed extensively to curriculum design in feminist sociology and developed certificate courses on gender studies and law. Professor Pujari has also conducted research on tribal women in Orissa, child rights in Mumbai and New Zealand, and led an UNFPA-funded study on gender sensitivity in Mumbai's media. Recently, she examined the role of women's development cells in creating inclusive campuses in South Mumbai. Ma'am, I once again extend our warm welcome and kindly request you to start the session. You can take a 40-minute for the presentation maybe, after which we can keep 10 minutes for questions and discussions. Over to you, ma'am.
Okay, thank you so much. Am I audible?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So thank you so much for that introduction. Good morning to one and all present here, respected Vice Chancellor, Professor Rabindra Das, Professor Chaudhary, President, Indian Sociological Society, other dignitaries, Dr. Gargi and Dr. Maureen. It's an absolute honor to be here today. Thank you, Surya Kumar Bhuiya School of Social Sciences, Krishna Kant Hadiki State University, and Indian Sociological Society for this opportunity. Thank you, Dr. Gargi and Dr. Maureen, for a very well conceptualized theme for the workshop and a much needed intervention given the times we live in. So what I'm going to attempt here, I will share my screen, but the screen is, okay, okay, it says, all right, let me just share the screen, but is the screen visible? Okay, one sec.
No, ma'am.
Not visible?
Yes,
Visible, ma'am, it's visible.
yes, it is visible now.
It's visible now. Okay, all right, okay. So the screen is just suggestive for you to kind of, to help you to sort of keep track of what I'm saying. So what I will attempt here today is an overview and a brief introduction on qualitative research before I dive into the main theme of reflexivity and its significance in qualitative research. I think it's important, and before I do that, I think it's important to bear in mind the fact that qualitative research is not a monolithic discourse, and there is a diversity of research practices within qualitative research. And let me start by drawing your attention to, the dominant frameworks of knowing and researching, that have been institutionalized in the social sciences. And when we begin with those dominant frameworks of knowing, I think we will also begin with the philosophical assumptions of research, where we speak about these 4 different concepts. That's Professor Chaudhary earlier in her inaugural address also referred to these. She spoke about ontology and epistemology. Let me quickly tell you about each one of this. I'm assuming most of you here would know this. Now, ontology is, of course, the nature of reality. So, it asks about what is reality like. The usual thing is that the reality is, its reality is something that is objectively constituted, so on and so forth. Now, epistemology asks deeper philosophical questions about what is knowledge and how do we know what we know, and who is a knower. Axiology is, of course, the role of values in knowledge in research, whether we are talking about value-free research or are we talking about research where we know values are present and we are conscious of the way the values enter into the research site. Methodology is, of course, it's a framework which guides research, the entire process of doing research. It's a framework, it's a paradigm that kind of guides research. Now, and then, of course, as I was telling you, I will begin with the dominant frameworks of knowing and researching that have been institutionalized in the social sciences and modeled largely on the natural sciences. The scientific way of knowing tells us that social reality is objectively constituted, that there's one truth, one social reality out there waiting to be discovered, right? And who can discover that? So who can be the knower? Who can tell us what is that truth and what is the conclusions that they have arrived at? It's the scientist, okay? The knower of all knowledge is none other than the scientist who investigates social reality by using scientific techniques and modes of thought in order to uncover the truth. And of course, the reality once known is then universalized and applied to all situations, irrespective of historical particulars and the context within which it's happening. And of course, this pursuit of truth is value neutral. So that is axiology for you. That it's value-free research. There are no values. If at all they are there, values, emotions, sentiments, they just have to be separated. They just have to be removed. So that we produce what is known as uncontaminated, so that the research process is uncontaminated. And because if this is not done, then the pursuit of genuine science becomes unattainable. I mean, these are the things I'm sure as students we've all learned in our classrooms, in the university spaces, as beginning students of sociology are invariably taught these ideas. So I'm sure this will resonate with you. And the entire research process is marked by a worldview that reifies objectivity. Objectivity is installed as a norm, and there's a distance between we are told that there has to be a distance between the researcher and the participant, and this in fact sets up a dichotomy between the subject and the object. And in all this imagination, what we are essentially doing is we are foregrounding the researcher as powerful and knowledgeable, and the research becomes an object, who is supposed to be less knowledgeable, doesn't know much, and full of prejudices and biases, and has a commonsensical understanding of things. Now, in sharp contrast to this, and I must also sound a note of caution. I don't want to set this up as a binary of qualitative and quantitative, like some of the previous speakers did mention. talk about it, talk about the need for holistic research and all that. So I don't want to set it up as a binary, but the fact is that qualitative research is imagined in a slightly different way. But I must also say that strands of positivism and empiricism also come into certain kinds of qualitative research, which is why I say that qualitative research is not a monolithic discourse. There are diversity of research practices in qualitative research, and we need to be mindful of that as we go along. Qualitative research embraces the idea of multiple realities, values experiential knowledge, participants' voices, recognizes the importance of context in understanding. It is informed by a worldview that does not believe in numbers alone, but it believes in listening to people, and it is not about how many and what kind of people, share a certain character, but to gain access to the cultural categories and perspectives that inform their understanding of the world. And qualitative research is a research that believes in praxis. It is about social transformation. It is about change. It is about criticality. It is also about a lot about reflexivity, which I'll come to in some time. So in a qualitative study, if one, when it comes to ontology, we know that qualitative research believes in the idea of multiple realities, not one. Truth is not one, but competing and multiple truths. And it's always a partial kind of truth because we always see things from our location. So the truth in that sense is partial. Epistemology, we know it values experience. And of course, the other important thing is qualitative researchers admit, and this is very important, admit the value-laden nature of the study and actively report their values and biases, as well as the value-laden nature of the information that they gather from the field. So, we say that researchers position themselves. It's a very common term that we use when we are writing a research project or we're writing a qualitative research. We generally sort of talk about, there is a statement about a position, and we identify our social location, where we come from in relation to the context and setting of the research. And we acknowledge that all researchers bring values to a study, and we make these values very known and very obvious. We don't have this illusion or this pretense of value-free research, that we're free of all biases, we stand above all that. We don't do that in qualitative research, right? And what enables this sort of acceptance and acknowledgement is the idea of reflexivity. And that's how I wish to enter there. With this context, is how I wish to enter this whole discourse on reflexivity. It is an important tool that enables this acceptance of values in research, and the fact that research is socially situated, context dependent, so on and so forth. And we'll come to that in some time. So reflexivity plays an essential role in acknowledging and articulating the researcher's subjectivity underpinning research. And in fact, Sandra Harding, one of the standpoint feminist theorists, she says, this is what real objectivity is all about. To be able to reflect, to be able to acknowledge, to be able to accept, to be able to critically interrogate and talk about how you as a researcher enter the setting. And when you do all of this, it is actually true objectivity. So, in many ways, it has been redefined by feminists. And of course, we do research for social transformation. We believe in critical social research. We believe in doing research that can change the lives of people, that can produce a shift somewhere in the thought processes. Research, not just for research's sake, but research which can bring about a transformation. So as I said, in qualitative research, reflexivity has become an important means of understanding knowledge production. And in fact, it is central to the debates on subjectivity, objectivity, and ultimately the scientific foundation of social science research. So what exactly is reflexivity? Let us try and understand this. Now, reflexivity starts from an assumption of socially situated knowledge and embodied knowledge, right? It is a process of critical self-introspection where we turn the gaze inwards. When I say we, I mean, we, the researcher, we turn the gaze inwards and ask ourselves several questions. Where do I come from? What are my privileges? How does my social location impinge on the research process? Is the data getting mediated through my social location? Is it filtered through my perceptions, or am I truly representing the participants' voices? It's a tough call, right? How does my gender, caste, class, sexuality, and other markers influence the research process, especially the field, the setting, the questions, the participants, and the responses? Every bit of thing in the research setting and prior to that, and even later, how does it get impacted by me, the researcher? And also, how am I getting impacted by the whole process, right? As a researcher, what about my sentiments, emotions, feelings, my sense of responsibility, accountability, guilt, shame? Am I being too intrusive? We don't talk about these things in our methodology classes. We should be doing quite a bit, right? Because if we talk too much, then there is always this danger of, oh, it's not very objective. Oh, there is no rigor in the research process, and so on and so forth. I'll just give you a little example here. A couple of my students were very keen on doing a research project on sex workers in Mumbai. That's where I come from. And so invariably, I push them into asking, very gently nudge them towards the reflexive selves of theirs, and asking them about, but why do you ask yourself? Why are you interested in doing a research on sex workers, right? Why not some other topic? What is it that determines or governs and influences the decision? We need to be mindful about the fact, and it's tough, it's difficult. Are you prepared of the consequences, the long haul, and the struggles that it entails? And they of course, they remained resilient all through it. And they said, yes, we're doing it because we really want to understand their world. We want to see the world through their perspective. It is not sensationalism. We are not doing it with a sense of adventure, but we really want to gain an understanding into their worldview, right? So it was a long haul, 6 months. They could not get through to the sex workers. The organizations that they work with refused. And they said, no, we won't allow that because we think it's very intrusive. You get into their world, you have a conversation with them, and then what happens after that? So we don't want. Finally, after 6 long months, they were able to get in touch with an organization which was very convinced by their sincerity and said, okay, we will take you through the whole process. And then they went through a process of training about how to sort of approach, and how there should be no interview, how there should be a series of conversations, and so on and so forth. And finally, when it happened over a period of a few days, at the end of it, my students, were left. They had a terrible sense of guilt about what they did. And why was it? Because at the end of the conversation, on their way out, they met these little girls of the sex workers who told them, Didi, acha, ab fir kab aoge wapas? And they were pretty devastated knowing that they would not come back here. Not easy to come back here. And so that was something that made them question a lot about, okay, why did we do this? What did we do this for? Were we too intrusive? What are we giving them back in return? We took their time. They agreed to these conversations with us. But what are we giving them back in return? And I was having a conversation with someone, and and he said, but Lina, see, you heard them, right? The students heard them, gave them their time. But is that enough? So and the good part is the researchers came back and spoke about it. That is an example of reflexivity, where you think about, who am I? What am I doing there? And what did I give them back in return, right? So these are the things that we do not discuss. We do not talk about. Our methodology classes are generally, very linear narrative of the researcher, go to the field, collect information, come back, analyze, and that's done. And there's so much that's happening in between that we really don't talk about. So I just wanted to also say, so reflexivity, just to keep the record straight and just to be very sure, reflexivity is not just a reflection or a positionality statement where researchers convey their background, etc., and how it informs their interpretation of the study and what they have to gain from the study. I think it moves much beyond that. Reflexivity necessitates an analysis of power, where you look at the research site as a site of power relations, with attention to multiple epistemologies and interpretation. I mean, reflection is certainly a necessary first step to approach reflexivity, but that alone is not enough or sufficient. A more careful understanding of systems of power, institutional privilege, and marginalization, and the social symbols that communicate status and hierarchy are necessary in order to situate oneself within the research sphere. To give you a brief history of sort of the origins, where did this idea of reflexivity come about? When and how and where we started talking about it in research. Now, and it's a brief history, obviously, given the time constraint, I won't be able to exhaust everything. But so when and how did this concept originate? Well, the origins have been diverse and in different directions. I mean, there were three sorts of radical critique in sociology in the 1960s, into which reflexivity actually fits in. It began with Garfinkel and ethnomethodology, in which reflexivity was understood to describe the situated nature of all social knowledge, and was meant as an attack on abstract general theorizing, which we saw in sociology until that point of time. An entirely different radical critique of sociology emerged around the same time in the work of Kollner, who argued that knowledge was not independent of the knower, and is intimately bound up with the political and socioeconomic context within which it exists. And so a reflexive sociology opposes and rejects the methodological dualism as witnessed in positivism. And the dualism is, of course, a dualism between the subject and the object of research. We don't see the participants as subjects like us, capable of producing knowledge, having agency, but we set it up as a kind of dualism. And you would know that a series of dualisms, often referred to as Cartesian dualism, that characterizes the development of social and political theory. It's between fact and values, and mind and body, nature and culture, and so on and so forth. And this was one of those kind of dualisms. Then, of course, we had Bourdieu, an anthropologist who was quite disenchanted with the idea of being a detached observer, and of being an unreflective observer from the outside of ethnographic kind of communities. And he said, see, the social researcher occupies a place in the social world. I mean, we are part of the world that we are studying. We are not studying inanimate objects, right? And so if the world is the object of a study and we are part of the world, then we have to adopt a very critical awareness of our own social location in relation to both the research participant and the process of research, right? And all three, in many ways, were critiquing the myth of value-free and uncontaminated research. However, the sharpest, the idea of power relations definitely was absent in the analysis of these three thinkers. And of course, very, very masculinist assumptions. The researcher was invariably a male in their idea of things. I think the sharpest critique, especially in relation to epistemological and methodological issues, came from feminists. And they were these were feminist philosophers, feminists of science. They were sociologists, all of them. And you can see the names here: Dorothy Smith, Patricia Hill Collins, Liz Stanley, so on and so forth. And a little bit on what they were saying. So basically, now, they were the standpoint theorists. We generally refer to them as standpoint theories. They questioned the idea of objectivity in scientific and social research and the privileged position accorded to the researchers' observations against those of the voiceless subjects, invariably the women here. Now, in fact, Adrienne Rich, she insisted, she said objectivity is a term that men have given to their own subjectivity. Right? And Liz Stanley, in fact, used the term hygienic research to puncture the idea of value neutral research. I mean, she says, what is this hygienic research? This is a kind of research where there are no problems, no emotions are involved. It is research as it is described instead of being research as it is experienced. Very straightforward, linear, unproblematic, easy way. I can't say easy, but it seemed as a very linear way of doing research, okay, when there were no problems, no issues, no questioning, no reflection, nothing. And the decontextualized and disembodied nature of knowledge production came in for sharp critique. And it was a very interesting critique that came. And so, for example, they said that if indeed, as our conventional, traditional scientists were to tell us that this is a research that is pure and, that is free of all biases and prejudices, how does one sort of, if indeed this knowledge was uncontaminated by the biases of the researcher, how does one explain the exclusionary nature of the knowledge? I mean, it was full of biases, lapses, and failings. I mean, how? Now, problems to be investigated reflected male experience. Theoretical frameworks reflected masculine gender identity. Narratives were male-centered. Everything bore the imprint of the knowledge producer, who was invariably white, a white heterosexual male, cis-het male, located in a certain geographical context. And the margins and their stories, their frameworks, and their lens was completely missing. You could not see them anymore. Right? I mean, what does this tell us? This obviously tells us that you can't separate the knower from the known, that the knowledge will bear the imprint of the knowledge producer, right? And this brings us to the idea of socially situated knowledge. There cannot be a separation between the knower and the known. What we need is, there is invariably a connection there. We experience the world from a particular social location, and this location significantly impinges on what we know and how we know. It shapes one's epistemic perspective. Yet, if you see, feminists have developed this idea in significantly sort of different directions. So the idea of situated knowing has been developed in, as I said, in a very prominent direction by the feminist standpoint theorists. And the other idea that came in a very interesting way was the idea of epistemic privilege. So this was the idea that those who come from the margins, hold a kind of epistemic privilege. That is to say, those who are socially underprivileged are more likely to develop a deeper understanding of the world than are those who occupy a socially privileged position. And this is something that Nancy Hartstock spoke about in 1983. This is something that Dubois, an American, Black American sociologist, speaks about when he talks about double consciousness, right? So he says one way of knowing is what the dominant group tells you and teaches you, which comes from books, which comes from texts, which comes from, what has been documented. Then another way of knowing is my own experience, right? Is how I experience the world. Right? So an African American going to a school and learning about the great American democracy, values of liberty, equality, and then coming out of the school and in the school itself experiencing racism, classism, outside the school experiencing segregation. I mean, and then what happens to the values of liberty and equality? There seem to be these two different worlds, right? And why is no one talking about it in the text and in the school and in the classroom and in colleges and in university spaces, right? And this is the kind of epistemic privilege so I have the privilege of knowing the world in two different ways. I have this double consciousness, right? In fact, this was something that was referred to by Dorothy Smith, another sociologist, another standpoint feminist who brought in the idea of sociology for women. And she said, when we do our research, we must begin from women's experiences. And she spoke about this bifurcated consciousness, which is slightly different, where she talks about the world of experience and the world of the academia. The two of them seem to be very, very different. So she says that there's a disjuncture between how women find and experience the world from their place and the concepts and theoretical schemes that are available to us to think about it. Right? The two worlds and the two bases of knowledge and experience don't stand in an equal relation at all. I mean, the world of knowledge is generally in the hands of men, is controlled by men. She calls it the ruling class, the relations of ruling, borrowing from Marxist terminology. And she said these are constituted by men and they stand in authority over that of women. It is that part of the world from which our kind of society is ignored and from which that happens to us begins. And what is this our kind of world? Are the domestic, the everyday, where you care for people, where you're constantly struggling, and the world of academia, where you are researching, teaching, studying, they don't seem to mesh with each other. And this world of academia does seem to acknowledge and understand what that other world of ours is like. And she refers to it as a bifurcated consciousness, right? Taking this further is Patricia Hill Collins, another African-American Black feminist sociologist, and she talks about the outsider within. And she says how for Black women, they are part of the academia, they're part of decision-making, maybe they're part of organizations where they are within, but they remain an outsider. Because whatever is happening within the organization, within the academia, the discussions, the deliberations, the discourses, doesn't seem to factor in my experiences of segregation, of marginalization, of racism, of sexism, of the intersections, my intersecting vulnerabilities. That doesn't seem to factor in at all. So, and also this socially situated way of knowing and researching, I think, is a very important epistemological assumption, is the whole idea of dialogue in assessing knowledge claims, right? That how do we produce knowledge? Okay, knowledge production is not an individualistic affair. It's a collective affair. It happens through dialogue. It happens through interactive forms of knowing. And in this, what we see is connectedness rather than separation. This is an essential component of the knowledge validation process. And the idea of reflexivity comes in here. So Sandra Harding questions, she says, what is this objectivity? What is this strong objectivity? This objectivity is nothing, but it's full of biases, as I just spoke about sometime, a while ago. And she says, she kind of redefines objectivity, and she says real strong objectivity is when you acknowledge the biases and make space for them. When you reflect, you know that values are present, and but you reflect constantly to ensure that you can minimize the impact of to some extent, the impact of those values on your research work, on the questions that you're exploring. And the other important thing that we need to bear in mind is when we are doing research, especially in qualitative research, I think it's important that we first address questions of ontology and epistemology. It's very important how these questions get answered. Right? So we have to answer this question of what is knowledge for me? Is knowledge all about facts and evidence, which is out there, which is independent of me, which is what realism is all about? And it really doesn't matter how I think about it. It just exists. Is this knowledge, or is knowledge also about me and how I perceive the world? Is it about my perception also? Is it also about how I experience the world? Can experience become the basis of knowledge? If yes, then of course, the way you go about doing research changes. Your tools of your methods of doing research will change accordingly. Your methodology, your paradigms, your interpretive frameworks will also undergo a change. Now, how does one practice reflexivity? This is a very difficult question, actually. So I hope what I have made clear so far is, and I hope you've understood this, that reflexivity actually disrupted the idea of a detached, uninvolved, distant, value-neutral, unaffected, impersonal researcher, and exposed the contradictions inherent in this claim. Okay, that the research is a very neutral site. It brought into sharp focus the power relations inherent in research, the fact that research is embodied, involves emotions, feelings, sentiments, and I need to talk about it. And the knower cannot be separated from what is known. It is context dependent. And of course, it celebrates the idea of multiple realities. And a very important thing, the truth is always partial. It can never be complete because we are looking at the world from a certain standpoint. Okay. And none of us, are omniscient and, neutral observers. Because of this epistemological standpoint, I think qualitative researchers, they value the ability to reflect upon and think hard about our own effects on our research, right? Now, also a little bit is before I go to practicing reflexivity. Liz Stanley says that when you are reflexivity is about two things also. It's about many things, but reflexivity, especially in relation to legitimation and representation. So legitimation is, of course, the data, the methods of knowing, the methods or the tools of data collection, how valid they are, what are we using, what about our data? That is one thing, how valid is our data? And this is internal validity that we are talking about. I'm not talking about replicability, the way they use it in quantitative research, but internal validity. Does the data really reflect, the responses of the participants, how close it is to the respondents' real views? How do I ensure that they're speaking they're speaking the truth, as close to the truth as we can get? The other is representation. How do I write? How do I present, the data? How do I write up my qualitative research? I mean, this is where reflexivity. So reflexivity, in fact, I would say that reflexivity is a continuum. I would not want to confine reflexivity to just the process of doing research. I think reflexivity is present in our everyday lives, in everything that we do. Even as a teacher, as a pedagogue, I'm constantly reflecting in the classroom about what I'm telling my student. The process of self-evaluation, introspection is always on. And in fact, this is how we can practice reflexivity. You cannot just teach reflexivity in methodology classes, research classes. Of course, you will do that, but that may not be enough. Reflexivity as a process has to be integrated as a thought, has to be integrated in everything that we do, in the curriculum, in the theories that we do, in the research methodologies that we teach, tools of data collection, in the questions that we're exploring. The kind of questions that we are framing. Why do we do research? Why this topic? Why not that? What is the purpose? What is the significance? Why am I getting into it? Is it something to do with my own experience? Is it something to do with what I feel strongly about? It's important to constantly do this. There are, of course, other ways in which you can sort of practice reflexivity is, also a very important way of doing it is to think about how do the participants think of you? As a researcher, the way I am, my name, my dress, my body language. How is that being perceived by the participants? Are they perceiving it as alien, as hostile, as friendly? These are very interesting questions that we always ask when my students come with research topics. And invariably, I see there's a tendency to always look at other communities, to look at other communities and to critique their ways of life. And I always tell them, but why not yours? Why can't it be an insider analysis? Why does it always have to be outsider? And also once you get into the research process, I mean, can a male researcher, for example, do a research on the practice of veiling? How my identity as a Savarna researcher located in an urban context, how will that matter? So, for example, when I'm doing research. So these are the questions that come in, and these are the things that you can do to practice reflexivity. You can also design research that includes multiple investigators, so for example, if you're studying conservative students on campus, right, and you thoroughly identify yourself as liberal, you might want to pair up with a researcher interested in the topic who grew up in a conservative household. I mean, also, we are constantly asking, right? If I'm a cis woman, can I do research on trans persons, right? And what are the things that I need to be mindful of, that I need to be very careful about? And there are questions about, can I not do it, but why can't I do it? And these are questions that probably we may not have answers to. I mean, but it's important to raise these questions and think about it. That's extremely important. And finally, I think to stick to my time limit, I will end with a there's of course a critique of the idea of reflexivity, that there are critics who say, oh, this is all self-indulgence. Research is not about you. It cannot be about you telling us about your social location, how it impacted the researcher, how you were impacted or affected by the participants. It cannot be all about self-indulgence. And the study is not about you. To some degree, yes, but then that also misses the point. Okay. To adopt the viewpoint of reflexivity is not to renounce objectivity, but to question the privilege of the knowing subject. I think that's extremely important. All studies on the social world are inevitably about us as well as, because we are part of the social world. And it's actually, in fact, dangerous to pretend that we are neutral observers, we are outside of what we are observing. To adopt the viewpoint of reflexivity is not to renounce objectivity, but as I said, to question the privilege of the knowing subject. And of course, we need to bear in mind that research is messy. As Liz Stanley says, there's nothing like hygienic research. It is messy because a social life is complex. It's not a linear narrative. There are so many nuances. So reflexivity has to be cultivated, right? It does not come just like that. It has to be taught in classrooms, incorporated in curriculum, not just in research, but in everything that we do. And of course, the dangers of always being told that your research is subjective, it lacks rigor, and there's no distance will be there. But if our goals are emancipatory and we operate with a vision of social justice, that Professor Maitri spoke of in our inaugural address, then I think we must practice reflexivity in our everyday lives. And yes, it is true that as students, researchers, and professionals, we are products of a very long process of socialization into academic life, heavily reliant on the value of science and objectivity above all else, and the difficulties that researchers have in speaking about their own emotions. Part of this, we often tend to suppress and we don't talk enough about it. And part of the suppression of inappropriate emotion also relates to notions about rigor in carrying out research. Because, we are always worried about, is it sending the wrong message to my other colleagues? But of course, reflections upon the relationship between us as researchers and them as participants has drawn attention to power in research relations. So finally, to end, I will say that with all its slippages and its critiques, I think reflexivity is a very, very important methodological tool in qualitative research. And we must learn, practice it all the time, not just in research, but in every space that we find ourselves in. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for the very interesting and insightful deliberation and providing us with a detailed account on qualitative research and the nuances of reflexivity. I can see some very interesting questions in our chat box. We can take maybe 2 or 3 of them. And if we do not have time, I would like to inform the participants that you can also post your questions or queries in our university's LMS portal, which you have the registration ID and password, so that we can keep these questions for our resource person and they can, deal with that later. So I'll take 2 questions. One is, how is interpretivism different from reflexivity? Is reflexivity a subset of interpretivist research or an integral foundation? This question is by Dr. Mayuk Dasgupta. Ma'am.
Okay. I'm audible, right?
Yes.
Your next session is on interpretive framework. It's in phenomenology and interpretive framework. So I think Professor Maitri is talking about it, and I think it will obviously get answered there. But yes, reflexivity is a very important aspect of interpretive. What was the question? Can you just repeat here? I can't see the question here. And I lost you in between a little bit. So if you can just rephrase.
Sure, ma'am.
I mean, repeat.
The question is, how is interpretivism different from reflexivity? Is reflexivity a subset of interpretivist research or an integral foundation?
Absolutely. I mean, reflexivity is a very, very significant aspect of interpretivism, of interpretive research, right? Because you are all the time, so when you're trying to interpret what the participants are telling you, when you're trying to understand their worldview, you're constantly reflecting and asking questions about, am I getting it right? What is it? So for example, let's say if I'm in an ethnographic research site, and I see certain kind of rituals that are happening, right? Now, as an outsider, I will have one way of understanding it, maybe. I will say, okay, is this what it is? But when I start talking to them, it's important for me to understand it from their point of view, to interpret it from their point of view, their cultural categories, their meanings, their worldview. And that becomes extremely important. So certainly reflexivity is a part of interpretive framework, totally.
Thank you, ma'am. And we have another question, I guess. Just a minute. One question is, could you speak about what are some of the parameters of assessing scientific rigor in research while still acknowledging the situated nature of our conceptualization?
Okay. I think the scientific rigor. Okay. So I would not say scientific rigor, but yes, rigor, because the moment I say scientific rigor, I will have to adhere to the value standards of scientific research. So I think we need to reframe and revisit our notion of rigor. So what do we understand by this sort of rigor? That is what Sandra Harding speaks about, when she says that what is objectivity after all? Is it about distance? Is it about not making obvious my vulnerabilities and my emotions and my values and my biases and my prejudices? Acknowledging all of this is a way to maintain the scientific rigor. So one way of doing it is when you are being reflexive, okay, I think you are making an attempt to be honest, to be transparent. You're making an attempt to sort of see the data, present the data, represent the data from the point of view of the participants. That, I think, is one way of actually ensuring that rigor. I mean, of course, there are many nuances. So, for example, what do you do when one is empathy, right? Empathy and an ethics of care in research. What does it mean? In a scenario, in an environment where we are told that we have to maintain this distance, how far can I go? So, when sharing of experiences sometimes works very well in a research context, right? When you are in a research setting and you're trying to sort of gain familiarity and strike a rapport, and let's say talking to women who have, or you're researching on sensitive topics, and they will not open up to you easily. One way of doing that is, of course, empathizing with them and saying, yes, I understand what you've gone through. I understand what's happened, because maybe I have experienced it. Maybe I have seen it at close quarters, right? And this is a one way of sort of, convincing the participants, sort of giving her the confidence that, yes, I can share, that, yes, one of the things which kind of prevents people, the participants, from speaking up and talking about truth and sharing is this thing that, how will others understand it? Why would they understand it? Why should I share? Why should I share? Right? It's for me. I mean, how am I being benefited by all this? But one way in which you can sort of convince, and where they think, yes, unless they believe in you, they have that sense of trust in you. If you can repose that trust, then it works. I mean, and if you're doing this, you're empathizing, you're sharing. It doesn't mean that you are in some way sort of compromising on rigor and objectivity. You are not. In fact, you are not, because you're trying to get to the truth, which is more important. And the question that you need to ask yourself, why am I researching? What is the purpose of research? It's to understand. Ultimately, it's to understand what people are saying. Okay? And understand in a way in which I give agency to them. Right? And I think that they can react, think, act, they can do all of that. and their knowledge, and they're knowledgeable. They're extremely knowledgeable. Their experience teaches them a lot. When we are, for example, among tribal women, this is something that we learn. And that someone who may not have gone to a school or a college or a university campus knows so much, and there's so much to learn from them, right? If this is what I believe in, so, that's what I started my talk with. And I also reiterated later that we need to first understand and resolve this question of ontology and epistemology before we get down to other things. So if I am very sure about experience as a valid basis of knowledge, then I will also redefine rigor and try to understand that how will I maintain that rigor? I will not look at rigor in the scientific or quantitative or positivist way of looking at it, but in a different way of rigor as getting to the truth. If this answers your question, it's a very sort of a very important question, but also there are many nuances to trying to address this.
Thank you, ma'am. Maybe we can take one last question from Niharika Sekia. She asks, how as a researcher, can we not feel offended by certain answers? How can we ensure that our biases do not disrupt the flow of our research? This is the question.
Okay, this is something I think that you learn it best on the field. No amount of reading can help you, I think, or some amount of training will obviously help. But this is, and this is what Liz Stanley, in fact, talks about. She says all the nice little things that we learn in books and text about how to do research. When you actually go to the research field, you find it's not working. I mean, you find things are very different. I mean, for example, you're told that, probing helps, but, you suddenly feel that the people are just not interested. With all the rapport that you strike, people just don't talk. They will just speak in monosyllables. So how do you kind of then, deal with it? So that is where you learn, I think, more about research, okay, to ensure that all of this, some part of it is, of course, reading and training, and a large part of it is, of course, research. On the field, whatever you may do, you may choose to do ethnography, autoethnography. I think you learn a lot about all these nuances. In fact, just to give you another example of reflexivity, recently, and to tie it up with your question, is recently some students of mine who did a little bit of study on women development cells and internal committees in colleges in South Mumbai. One of the researchers spoke beautifully about her experiences, and she says that after all the training and after all that, when I went to the colleges to speak to the students, right? When we, in research, we also, the one thing that we say is when you're doing your interview guide, or when you're looking at your semi-structured sort of interview guide or whatever, and the first set of questions is socioeconomic profile. And one thing that we've learned is, we know that gender is self-ascribed, right? It is a matter of self-identity. So I'm not supposed to, just because I look at you and I cannot assume that you are this and this and that you are a man or a woman or a gay or, a trans or queer or whatever. So we generally leave it open and we say, how do you identify yourself? And how do you identify your gender? And she spoke about how some of the students just laughed at them and said, why are you even asking this question? Can't you see me? Right? But some others were very happy. And they said, we're happy that you're at least asking us, right? So this is something that she learned it on the field. And then she said, and she was a Muslim woman. And she said, when I went to a Muslim college, right? People just refused to, many of them didn't speak to me. But some of them, given my identity, when they saw me wearing a certain garment, spoke to me, and then they said that immediately there was a rap, there was a connect because of a familiarity with religion. And but in the same college, there were others who were very offended because they said, we don't speak about these identities. So and how can you ask us about this? We don't like to talk about anything related to queer identities, right? So she said how in one college, people opened up to her because of her religious identity, and they knew it because she was wearing a hijab. But in another college, it didn't work. It didn't work. The same group of students from the same, a different set of students from the same religion were quite offended by it. So yes, you need to be very patient. You needn't feel offended about what your participants tell you, that's also another way of reflecting. And you should ask as to why are they saying this? Why did they feel offended? I didn't mean it, but you need to understand from their point of view, where it's coming from, right? If you can cultivate that, then I don't think you will see it as a kind of, you'll feel offended by it.
Thank you, ma'am, for addressing the questions. And I believe this has been a very informative session for every one of us here. I thank you once again, Dina ma'am, for being with us. And with this, I end this session, and we will meet you again at 12 for Professor Matri Chaudhary's session. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much for having me.
কেটা বললাম 1 to speak.